In February 2015, the quiet town of Rochester, Minnesota, was shaken by a deeply disturbing case of obsession, control, and murder. Just after the Super Bowl, the tragic death of Larry Harrison, a 42-year-old man and manager of a local Applebee's restaurant, would unravel a tale that stunned the community. Larry Harrison was well regarded for his warm and personable demeanor. A dedicated Minnesota Vikings fan, he enjoyed watching their games with friends and family. Larry lived with his wife Lauren and their teenage son, Brian, in a comfortable home in a peaceful neighborhood where the family had resided for many years. A devoted husband and father, Larry cherished his family above all else. He and Lauren had been married for over 15 years, their relationship blossoming since meeting in college, where they quickly fell in love. Larry took great pride in being an attentive father to Brian, often assisting him with homework or coaching his little league team. Beyond his family, Larry's outgoing personality and community spirit earned him admiration from many. He frequently volunteered at the local food bank and participated in neighborhood cleanup events, further cementing his standing as a beloved figure in Rochester. In the days leading up to his untimely death, Larry had been busily preparing a community gathering at his restaurant to celebrate the end of the football season. He planned a festive occasion to bring together friends and neighbors for a shared meal, highlighting their favorite Super Bowl moments. The New England Patriots had just claimed victory over the Seattle Seahawks on February 1, 2015, a game that Larry eagerly followed. His enthusiasm for the event and his work led him to spend extra hours ensuring its success. Additionally, Larry had personal plans in place, including a much-anticipated family trip to the Mall of America, where they intended to visit the amusement park and enjoy some shopping. Larry was a man who found joy in the simplicity of everyday life, whether it was spending time with his family or enjoying the company of friends. Those close to him knew him as a man with a bright future, full of dreams and plans. His sudden and violent death left an indelible void in the lives of those who knew and loved him. On the morning of February 8, 2015, at approximately 7:30 a.m., Lauren Harrison made a horrifying discovery. Upon entering the kitchen of their home, she found her husband Larry lying in a pool of blood. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times. The shock of the scene was overwhelming, and Lauren immediately screamed for help, alerting the neighbors to the unfolding tragedy. One neighbor, Mary Benedictus, who lived next door, rushed to Lauren's side. Upon witnessing the gruesome sight, she quickly called 911, struggling to process the horror before her. Mary would later recount her feelings of disbelief and fear. She had known Larry for many years and could not fathom how such a terrible crime could have happened. It felt like a nightmare, Mary recalled in an interview with the local media, adding that Larry was known to be a kind and gentle man. As emergency responders arrived on the scene, they found Lauren in a state of shock, barely able to speak, repeatedly calling out Larry's name in a desperate attempt to reconcile the devastating reality she faced. Paramedics assessed Larry's condition, but he had been deceased for some time. As the Rochester Police Department began to investigate, the news of Larry Harrison's tragic death quickly spread through the small town. Media outlets, including the Rochester Post-Bulletin, reported the incident, and neighbors gathered outside the Harrison home, offering support to Lauren and Brian. A community that had been filled with post-Super Bowl celebration just days earlier now found itself grappling with grief and unsettling updates. The discovery of Larry Harrison's body marked the beginning of a complex and heartbreaking investigation, one that would uncover dark secrets and leave a lasting impact on the entire Rochester community. As the authorities secured the scene and comforted a distraught Lauren Harrison, the search for answers in this shocking case was only just beginning. The investigation into Larry Harrison's murder quickly grew complicated as detectives Jonathan Gustafson and Sarah Brown dug deeper into Lauren Harrison's personal life. Her affair with Garmin Wilson, her son's best friend, immediately raised suspicions. While Lauren confessed to the affair during questioning, she firmly denied any involvement in her husband's brutal murder. Despite her claim of still loving Larry, Detectives Gustafson and Brown needed to verify Lauren's alibi and explore other potential motives. Lauren stated that she had been asleep at home during the time of the murder, only waking up to find Larry's lifeless body in the kitchen the next morning. However, there were no signs of forced entry, which implied that Larry might have known his attacker, and Lauren had access to the home throughout the night. The detectives found it difficult to dismiss her as a suspect entirely. To strengthen their investigation, the detectives decided to interview Garman Wilson, the 18-year-old involved in the affair. Garman, who had been close to the Harrison family for years, was deeply shaken by Larry's death. During questioning, he admitted to the affair with Lauren but denied any involvement in the crime. Garman claimed he was at a friend's house the night of the murder, which detectives later corroborated through phone records and witness statements. However, the detectives were not convinced the affair wasn't a catalyst for the murder. As forensic experts analyzed the crime scene, they discovered further evidence. The bloodstain pattern analysis revealed that Larry had been attacked from behind while preparing something in the kitchen, suggesting he was caught off guard. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife found near the body, bore traces of both Larry's blood and an unidentified set of fingerprints, further complicating the case. In the following days, tensions rose in the small town of Rochester. Rumors circulated about Lauren's affair, with many in the community shocked by the revelations. As the detectives continued to sift through evidence and interview more people, they remained focused on finding a motive. While Lauren remained their primary suspect, they had yet to uncover definitive proof linking her to the crime. Pressure mounted as the public, the media, and Larry's grieving family demanded justice. Detective Sarah Brown's instinct to revisit Margaret Smith's bedroom turned out to be a pivotal moment in the investigation. Margaret, Lauren's elderly mother, had been living with the Harrisons for the past 2 years due to declining health. While she hadn't been a focus of the investigation thus far, Brown believed that no stone should be left unturned, especially with the complexity of the relationship surrounding Larry's death. As she carefully searched through Margaret's belongings, Brown discovered a small, blood-stained handkerchief tucked underneath her bed. The sight of the blood immediately raised alarm bells, and she knew this could be a breakthrough. She bagged the evidence carefully and had it sent for forensic analysis, hoping that it would yield valuable information. Back at the station, Detective Gustafson and Brown discussed the significance of the find. While the handkerchief was suspicious, they needed more context. Margaret, who was often bedridden, didn't seem like a likely suspect. However, her presence in the house and possible awareness of family tensions made her an important figure in the puzzle. Could she have witnessed something or, more disturbingly, been involved in some way? As they waited for the forensic results, the detectives decided to re-interview Margaret. Though frail and seemingly disoriented at times, Margaret's sharpness in certain moments hinted that she might know more than she had initially let on. That when questioned about the night of Larry's murder, Margaret remained vague, mentioning only that she heard noises but couldn't be sure what they were. However, when asked directly about the handkerchief, her demeanor shifted. She became defensive, claiming it was simply an old possession of hers, unrelated to the crime. The detectives weren't convinced. They pressed further, asking if Margaret had seen anyone in the kitchen that night or had any knowledge of Larry's murder. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with emotion, but ultimately she stayed silent. When the forensics came back, the results were shocking. The blood on the handkerchief matched Larry Harrison's. This new piece of evidence complicated the investigation even further. Margaret had some connection to the crime, but was she directly involved, or had she merely stumbled upon the scene? Detectives Gustafson and Brown now faced an even murkier situation. With no solid motive linking Margaret to the murder, they had to consider the possibility that she might be covering for someone else, perhaps even Lauren. The handkerchief, while incriminating, left more questions than answers. As the investigation continued, the detectives knew they were getting closer to uncovering the truth behind Larry's death, but they also realized that the tangled web of family secrets might run even deeper than they had first imagined. The discovery of Margaret Smith's obsessive letters to Larry Harrison added a shocking new dimension to the investigation. Detectives Gustafson and Brown were increasingly convinced that Margaret's unstable mental state, compounded by her decision to stop taking her schizophrenia medication, might have driven her to commit murder. During the interrogation on February 12, 2015, Margaret's demeanor oscillated between calm and erratic. She confessed to writing the letters, insisting they were merely an expression of her deep love for Larry, whom she believed was the reincarnation of her late husband, Edgar. Her attachment to Larry was far from harmless, as the letters revealed not only her delusional obsession, but also her desire to control both Larry and her daughter Lauren's lives. The investigation uncovered that Margaret had ceased taking her medication a month before the murder, which likely exacerbated her delusional thinking. Schizophrenia paired with the side effects from the medication like tardive dyskinesia had made her increasingly unpredictable. Lauren confirmed to the detectives that Margaret had always been controlling and erratic, but she had never suspected that her mother's obsession with Larry had reached such dangerous heights. Forensics soon provided a critical breakthrough: Margaret's fingered markers found on the knife used in Larry's murder. To this physical evidence, along with the disturbing content of the letters and her unstable behavior, painted a clear picture of a woman whose mental health had deteriorated to the point of violence. Her irrational belief that Larry was Edgar reincarnated seemed to serve as the twisted motive for the murder. When pressed further about the night of the murder, Margaret claimed she had been watching old episodes of Gunsmoke in her room, but her inconsistent and disjointed statements only deepened the detectives' suspicions. Though Margaret continuously insisted that she loved Larry and would never harm him, her erratic responses and history of controlling behavior over both Larry and Lauren suggested otherwise. As the evidence against Margaret mounted, including her fingerprints on the murder weapon and the disturbing nature of her letters, detectives concluded that her mental instability, compounded by her obsessive beliefs, likely drove her to kill Larry. Margaret Smith had become the prime suspect, and while her mental health struggles made the case particularly tragic, the detectives knew that her obsession had led to a dangerous and fatal outcome. The case highlighted the complexities of mental illness and the devastating impact it can have on those caught in its grip. While Margaret's condition may have contributed to her delusions, it could not excuse the violence she had inflicted on her family. The investigation was drawing to a close, and the detectives prepared to make their next move, knowing they were closer than ever to solving Larry Harrison's murder. The detectives understood the importance of a meticulous examination as they pieced together the tragic story of Larry Harrison's murder. It was Valentine's Day 2015 when the Rochester police made a significant breakthrough in the case, which had confounded the community for weeks. After thoroughly reviewing the evidence, including forensic reports, witness statements, and surveillance footage, the police finally identified Margaret Smith, Larry's 64-year-old mother-in-law, as the prime suspect in his murder. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Harrison family and the entire town. Margaret, a frail woman with silver hair and tired eyes, had been living with the Harrison family for years. To the neighbors, she seemed eccentric but harmless. Beneath that unassuming exterior, however, lay a troubled mind. Margaret had a long history of mental health issues, including severe anxiety, depression, and more recently, signs of dementia. Her erratic behavior had worsened in recent years, and she had stopped taking her medication for tardive dyskinesia, a condition that caused involuntary muscle movements as a side effect of her antipsychotic treatment. But it wasn't just her health that was deteriorating. Margaret had also developed an unhealthy obsession with her son-in-law, Larry. Larry, a 42-year-old shift manager at Applebee's, was well-liked in the community for his easygoing nature and dedication to his family. He had married Lauren Harrison nearly a decade earlier, and the couple lived in a modest house with their teenage son, Jamie. To outsiders, they were the picture of an average, hard-working family. Yet behind closed doors, tensions were simmering. Margaret had always been fond of Larry, but over time her affection deepened into something far more dangerous. She became possessive, often monopolizing his attention during family gatherings and making strange comments about how special their bond was. Initially, Larry brushed it off, thinking it was just a harmless crush from an elderly woman. But as her advances became more overt, he grew uncomfortable. Margaret's fixation became impossible to ignore, especially when she started leaving love letters around the house, expressing her undying affection for him. Larry, embarrassed and concerned for his wife's well-being, kept the situation quiet, hoping it would resolve on its own. However, things took a dark turn on the night of February 14, 2015. The police later reconstructed the events of that fateful evening based on evidence and testimonies. It was supposed to be a quiet night for the Harrisons, with Lauren and Jamie away visiting friends. Larry had stayed home, intending to relax after a long shift. Unbeknownst to him, Margaret had other plans. Around 9 p.m., Margaret confronted Larry in the kitchen. Her behavior was erratic, her eyes wild with desperation, as she demanded his affection in a more aggressive way than ever before. Her demand for sex was not only inappropriate but horrifying to Larry. Stunned by her forwardness, he loudly refused, telling her this had to stop. But Margaret, already in the grips of her obsession and declining mental state, couldn't handle the rejection. Her emotions spiraled out of control, and in a fit of rage, she grabbed a kitchen knife. The attack was brutal. Larry, caught off guard, tried to defend himself, but Margaret's fury was unstoppable. She stabbed him multiple times, her frenzied movements leaving him no chance to escape. Blood splattered across the white kitchen tiles, and the house, once so full of life, became a scene of unspeakable horror. Larry's final moments were filled with terror as he tried to comprehend how this nightmare had come to pass. By the time detectives Gustafson and Brown were called to the scene, the gravity of the crime was clear. The evidence, the knife, the bloody footprints, and the chaotic disarray in the kitchen painted a horrifying picture. The police wasted no time. They knew they had to act swiftly to apprehend Margaret before she could flee or harm herself. At around 6 a.m. the following morning, the Rochester police arrived at the Harrison home to arrest her. When the officers informed Margaret of the charges against her, she first appeared confused, her hand shaking as she clutched a tattered housecoat around her frail frame. But confusion quickly gave way to hysteria. "This Valentine's Day I give my heart to you, Larry," she screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. She insisted the death had been an accident, repeatedly blaming her tardive dyskinesia for the stabbing. Her claims, however, were inconsistent and incoherent. The overwhelming evidence, fingerprints on the knife, the letter she had written, and her bizarre behavior led to her arrest. The shockwaves of Margaret's arrest reverberated throughout the Harrison family. Lauren and her son were left devastated, struggling to process the horrifying truth. How could their mother and grandmother, a woman they had cared for and supported, commit such an unspeakable crime? Neighbors, who had always regarded Margaret as a harmless eccentric, were equally shocked. The entire community was thrown into turmoil, grappling with the unimaginable events that had unfolded in their midst. As Margaret was booked into the local jail, her behavior remained erratic. She fluctuated between calm detachment and fits of hysterical laughter. The police ensured she received medical attention, though her legal troubles were only beginning. Meanwhile, the media, including the Rochester Post-Bulletin, covered the case extensively. News of Larry's murder and Margaret's arrest dominated headlines for weeks, deepening the public's shock and sorrow. The trial of Margaret Smith commenced on April 20th, 2016, at the Olmsted County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed with family members, friends, and curious community members who had followed the case closely. The air was heavy with anticipation as the prosecution and defense prepared to make their arguments. David Benedictus, the tough and unrelenting prosecutor, led the state's case. He argued that Margaret's obsession with Larry had been festering for years. He presented the love letters as key evidence, painting a vivid picture of Margaret's unhealthy fixation on her son-in-law. Benedictus called forensic experts to the stand, who testified that Margaret's fingerprints were found on the knife used in the murder. He spared no details in describing the gruesome nature of Larry's death, leaving the jury visibly shaken. On the other side, Margaret's defense attorney, Linda Lou Green, took on the challenging case with empathy and resolve. Green didn't deny the crime but instead focused on Margaret's declining mental health. "I emphasized the role that tardive dyskinesia and other side effects of her medications had played in the incident." Green aimed to convince the jury that this was not a premeditated act, but a tragic accident born out of mental illness. Throughout the trial, Lauren Harrison and her son were fixtures in the courtroom. They sat quietly, holding back tears as they listened to the graphic descriptions of Larry's final moments. The emotional weight of the trial was palpable. After days of intense testimony and closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching a verdict. On May 5, 2016, Margaret Smith was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, acknowledging her mental health issues, sentenced her to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of receiving psychiatric treatment during her incarceration. The verdict brought a bittersweet sense of closure to the Harrison family. Lauren felt relief knowing that justice had been served, yet the emotional scars from losing her husband and knowing her mother was responsible ran deep. Margaret, stunned by the verdict, continued to insist that she never intended to kill Larry, describing the entire incident as an unfortunate accident. Her erratic behavior persisted, leading to her transfer to a mental health facility within the prison system, where she would receive the treatment she so desperately needed. Margaret's story didn't end there. In May 2021, she passed away from complications related to COVID-19, alone in her purdy, buried without a gravestone in the jailhouse cemetery.